Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Meghan Anderson from Adopted Life. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, thriving. What does thriving mean to you, Meghan?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about that the last couple weeks. I think really it is um, giving people the opportunity to really meet their potential, and really experience the things that they need to and have the confidence to really just like go forward and do great things with their life, whatever that looks like. But I just think really everybody has such truly unlimited potential, and we want to give people the tools to really meet that. And I keep wanting to say the word thrive, but that doesn't work when that's what we're defining. So, yeah.
No. um, uh, yeah, unlimited potential. It's such a big thing, right? Unlimited. What gets in the way of us seeing that? Because don't we all yearn for that, right?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes the framework we build for ourselves or we allow other people to build for us, that maybe sells ourselves short. Um, I think that's a huge barrier that a lot of us face. And I think that's very true in adoption, just sometimes the framework that gets built. And I think too, we all have an individual path, and sometimes those paths are bumpy and they have some experiences that, maybe not everybody has. And so I think when I think about thriving, it's like, how do we help everybody navigate that path? Whatever it looks like for them. And and so, yeah, I think, there's a lot of things that can get in the way, but also a lot of things we can do to help navigate that for everybody,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
in the adoption world.
Yeah. When you say framework, what do you mean, Megan?
Yeah, that's a total therapy term, and I use that all the time in my therapy practice. But I think just sort of the beliefs we allow ourselves to hold on to, the thought patterns that we gravitate toward, or maybe another really big therapy word for that would be the schema that we assign ourselves or we allow ourselves to be assigned to. It just sort of I mean, one way I think about it is a lens, that we're looking through, and some of those lenses are really distorted and not helpful. And so, and then when we do some work and we can see them and we can acknowledge them, then we have some power to change them and to find some that are maybe a little bit more helpful and probably more truthful as well.
Yeah. I can see the words on the whiteboard behind you.
I know, yeah,
True,
yeah,
helpful. So
right.
you obviously been looking at that.
Yeah.
So is it is another word for framework then paradigm, the way that we see the world? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to look at it as well.
Yeah.
It's just a system we build around ourselves and how we and our world we create.
Yeah. So you're talking about you mentioned that we take on the framework that the framework that we get from other people as well as what we create ourselves, our view of the world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, for all of us, there's a lot of, our parents very much help us build that framework from an early stage, our experiences. We know a lot of things from things like the ACEs study about, how those adverse early childhood experiences impact us later on. And it's all ingredients that go into building this framework. And it can even be, even on a more positive end, there's a lot of really great research about kids who have healthy, non-related adults in their lives, how that can be a really strong protective factor in their future. And that's a piece of their framework, how these healthy adults help them build a view of themselves. And then we carry that forward. And a lot of times, through adolescence, we're growing in a lot of really fun and exciting and sometimes challenging ways for our parents. And then hopefully we land in some places that allows for continued growth and development of that. And sometimes we have to let go of some of the framework that we've carried on or we've built.
Yeah. There's so many places I could dive in that. I'm going to go with the lens one, right? So you talked about uh, a distorted lens. What what helps us see our distortions?
Yeah. I think we usually don't see them until we start applying them in situations where it creates problems for us. Often those lenses are created out of a need and they're functional at some point in our lives. That's certainly true with some of our trauma responses and some of the things we carry forward. Those things start from a place as they're protective and they serve a function and they may be functional for a time and then we often don't see them until we start applying them in areas where they're not so functional, they're not so protective, and while they may be solving one problem, they're usually creating others for us. And that's really when I think most people start to notice, like, okay, what is this lens? And sometimes that does take some professional help to kind of explore that, and sometimes not. But that's kind of what I see is like when the application no longer is working, that's when we become more aware of what those lenses are.
Okay. So we were talking about Greece before we hit record. I remember reading a book on emotional intelligence. Most people wouldn't read that sort of a book on holiday, but I was sitting on a beach in Greece reading a book on emotional intelligence. It is emotional intelligence, well, it seems to me that emotional intelligence is one way that kind of helps us see our distortions, or is it a way of seeing our distortions? Is it how do those two things, how do you fit those two
Yeah.
things together? Because you're a therapist, so you're probably better expressing it than me. So how do distortions and emotional intelligence, how do they kind of tie together? What's their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking emotional intelligence one, it's a skill set, but two, it is a framework, I think, of sorts. But I think when you have emotional intelligence or when you're developing it or utilizing it, I guess, um, I think some of the most important aspects of that are an ability and a willingness to self-reflect, and self-reflection is really critical to seeing our lenses. If we're not ever looking, inward, we're certainly not going to notice what those are. And I think, people who tend to be higher on the whatever the scale of emotional intelligence, they have a lot of self-reflection and a lot of critical thinking that they can acknowledge, some faults or some weaknesses in themselves without it being threatening. And then people maybe on the lower end of that spectrum at whatever point in their life, they spend a lot of their energy protecting from those things because they perceive all that as potentially threatening. And so they're less likely to engage in that self-reflection where you see those things. You see, oh gosh, I've been doing this and it's really not working. It's really like maybe I have some power here to change this. A lot of times, I think people who haven't really built their emotional intelligence muscle or whatever it is, they perceive more of that as threatening, and so they try to protect themselves from it instead of stepping into it.
Yeah.
I think that's a big difference.
It seems to me it's one of those things that's kind of out of fashion now. It's kind of, I don't know. I read that book 20 years ago, and
Oh,
I don't hear so much. I don't
yeah,
hear so much of it, and I don't hear a lot of it in the adoption space, right? I don't hear, not many people mention that to me. Is that, am I just not hearing that?
yeah.
Or is it kind of passe? It's not part of the trauma? conversation?
Um, yeah, that's a good question because I'm thinking, yeah, like the first conference I went to where I really was exposed to this idea of like emotional intelligence and EQ, like
Yeah.
as opposed to IQ. It was probably 20 years ago. And I'm thinking like, oh, that was just barely, but yeah, it probably was 20 years ago. And I don't know. I mean, I think about it all the time, but I'm immersed in the world of therapy and adoption, and I just returned from the NCFA conference, which is a really big adoption
Yeah.
conference in the United States, and a lot of that is geared at, like looking at best practices, questioning, is what we're doing working? Can we do better? And so I don't know if it's just that I'm kind of immersed in that world that I don't think it's passe, although, we have like a kind of a crazy culture situation, particularly in the United States right now, where there's a lot of divide and a lot of pushback against some of the, um some of that growth is like maybe being, labeled as wokeness or whatever that can be good or bad depending on what part of that divide you fall on. But um I I do think in terms of adoption, I don't know if we're using the term emotional intelligence, but I do think we are trying to put a lot of intention into the way we're doing adoption and trying to be self-critical about, does this actually work for all the parties, particularly the most vulnerable ones, or is it just convenient for, on an administrative side, which has been an element of adoption for a long time.
Yeah. Because it strikes me for all of us, you use the word self-reflection and emotional intelligence. And from what I can remember, there's four quadrants, isn't there? The first one is us reflecting on us. And that when I'm doing a training for adoptive parents, I tend to share what I've learned from other adoptive parents, and we'll start with the cliche of putting our own oxygen mask on first, right?
Yeah.
So it's about our growth, and
Hmm.
and we've got to get past that idea. We have to shift the idea from fixing our kid to growing our own capacity, and
Yeah.
growing our capacity starts with our growth, and our growth starts with our ability to cope, our ability to understand, our ability to self-reflect, which to me seems like emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I'd be like, if people say, well, what can I do on my own? Or I can't afford therapy or whatever that is. Well, listen to some podcasts on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Buy an audiobook on intelligence, for whatever for whatever that costs you, or a book, and immerse yourself in that. It would seem to me to be a no-brainer of a step. And then people say, well, I haven't got time. Well, audiobooks you can do when you're doing something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Like,
Thank goodness for audiobooks.
stop making excuses and just kind of get on with it. Like,
Right. Yeah.
to what extent are you prioritizing? Well, I haven't got time. Well,
Right.
okay,
There's never
okay.
enough time, right? But
There's
yeah,
never enough time.
you have to pick what goes in there for sure. I mean, kids are just like such a mirror to the parents and the adults in their life, right? And so and there's a lot of really incredible work on co-regulation and how, if you cannot help your children regulate when as adults you're dysregulated and you don't have good regulation skills. I mean, there's just like so much evidence and research around that. And so helping parents know that yes, like often the most important thing you can do for your kids is work on yourself, is, grow that ability um to self-reflect and to accept and utilize your emotions for, for like your own growth. And that is going to be reflected in your kids as well.
Yeah. The other thing that pops into my head is because I was looking at it from me as a a leader of a small team. I had 5 or 6 staff, right? So
Yeah.
that it was looking to improve my own emotional intelligence in terms of my staff and in terms of my clients and all that stuff that we're doing. And the other thing that pops into my head is like I asked that question about how do we see the distortion on our lenses, and that that is a question in itself.
Right.
However, there are emotional intelligence questionnaires that you can do,
Sure. Yeah.
so that can help you to get that can be a tool to aid your own self reflection by getting the reflections of how the scores on the doors are, right, from your emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some great inventories out there that are free and easy to use, and some great resources and books. And reading them on the beach in Greece is a great way, or listening to them as you're traveling there or wherever. I'm listening to them while you're vacuuming, whatever it is. Like that's, there's a lot of ability to learn about yourself and do some of those inventories. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to, I've done it. I don't know if I've done it recently, listeners, but I like to drop in the fact that I sometimes listen to audiobooks while I'm doing the ironing, so I can show how what a new age man I am,
Double gold points for you. Yeah.
but I won't do any dusting or any vacuuming. So right, so I
Well, I
am
left my husband home to do the laundry today so I could do the podcast.
oh,
So,
brilliant. Um, so yeah, so that self-awareness piece, it can, you said how a a third party view, the view of a therapist can help us do that, but then we can do the stuff on our own with
for
the
sure.
truth.
Yeah.
And the other big, but I think the other thing, just before we move off the subject of emotional intelligence, have you seen the research out of, I think it was an organization in Canada saying that EQ is a far greater predictor of success in life, whatever that success means to, than IQ. It's actually more important. And
Yeah.
but the world of education doesn't really seem to have caught on to that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know the exact statistics, but that's what I'm remembering from that conference I went to ages ago as well. And definitely something I see. And, you mentioned education. It's just interesting because my husband works in education, and I have been a social worker in some educational settings before. And it's like it's just interesting, the administrators and the teachers that really are the most impactful on their staff and their students are the ones. They may not be have all the latest and greatest curriculum that they want to implement, but they're the ones that understand people and understand themselves and are comfortable supporting people. And that to me is emotional intelligence and that
Yeah,
EQ factor. They have great results,
that's
in the
yeah,
field of education. So yeah, there's definitely room to grow there.
yeah. Have you heard of a TV program called University Challenge? Have you heard of that?
No,
Okay.
no.
So it's a quiz show with very with people with very high IQ, right? But sometimes not the EQ. So these people, if I it lasts a half an hour, right? And I don't know how many questions they ask in that half an hour. Let's say they ask 50, right? Or let's say they ask 80. I usually get one or two questions right.
Yeah,
So these are, and I've done my school, done my university and stuff like that.
yeah.
So I would get 1 out of 80 correct.
Right.
But these guys and girls are very, they'll run away with the score. Like, I don't know what they get, how many they get right. So you might have you might some get scoring. You get 5 points for each answer. So you might have somebody gets 150 points and the other team gets 80, right? But these people, it's a competition between two colleges, two universities, and there's 3 people in each college. So there's six contestants in all. these people are incredibly bright, but
Hmm.
would you want to sit next to them on a plane to Greece?
Yeah.
Would they
Maybe
be
not.
great? Would they be great conversationalists? Right?
Maybe that, yeah, it
Yeah.
is a different
Would they
skill
make a
set.
great boss? Right? Would they make a
Yeah.
great thing? Anyway, because their
Yeah.
IQ is through the roof, but their
Yeah.
EQ is kind of less developed, shall we say? Because they've gone through, they've you talked about schema, and we talked about schema and framework. So they have gone down the kind of IQ is all that matters.
Right. Right.
That's the way that we're all raised.
Right.
There's no exams for EQ
Right.
in
Right.
elementary schools in the US, or elementary schools in the US, or primary schools in the UK, or secondary or college. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
Right.
everybody's barking up the wrong tree, really.
Right. Yeah. And I'm definitely an advocate for balancing, like things work better in balance and, you know, facts matter, but emotional intelligence does as well. And I
Yeah.
apologize. I don't know if you can hear that dinging, but my son is
No.
texting me.
Okay. I can't hear it. That's cool.
Okay, good.
Um, emotional intelligence, basically, get if this stuff sounds like it's important to your listeners, maybe skip the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Well, find one talking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
The other thing that you talked about in terms of our unlimited potential, you talked about our beliefs, and that's not an area that's talked a lot about.
Yeah.
People talk about self-limiting beliefs, and they are limiting beliefs, or those sorts of things, false beliefs, all these things. That's not an area that we talk about a lot in adoption
Yeah.
land either.
Right, right. I think a lot of times they're kind of more automatic. They're a little bit more they're not always obvious, but I've been a fan of doing kind of a belief audit on yourself, and really making some of those things that are a little bit intrinsic, a little more explicit and challenging some of those and particularly around adoption, what is your belief set that you're carrying forward into whatever part you play in the process or whatever role you're taking in the process? What are those beliefs really serving you or are they limiting you
Yeah,
or others?
or others. And I'm guessing with a blank piece of paper, that's probably a challenging task. That I'm guessing that there are some tools there online that you can find in terms of inventories.
Yes, I'm trying to think honestly. I'm not going to be able to remember where my favorite one is, but I'll try to find it and get it to you because there are a couple of really good tools and it can be a blank piece of paper, but yeah, sometimes that can be overwhelming. But just essentially like identifying around a particular issue, what are my beliefs here, and really spending some energy on that, and then like ag some acknowledgement, like number one, is this even true or potentially untrue? And is it serving me, or do I need to let this go and find something that is going to serve myself, my family, my situation more fully? And it still has to be true, like you can't shift to like a Pollyanna kind of viewpoint that everything's always wonderful and great and fine. But just, it always has to be true, but it also needs to be serving us and helpful.
Yeah. The other tool that's popping into my head, and I don't know if you played around with Chat GPT.
Okay, well, I've tried and I've got to, but I'm not great at it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're into that, listeners, then you could play around with it. So one of the prompts could be something like this. Uh, I'd like to see I'd like to explore any limiting beliefs that I have around my adoption, or my adoptive kids, or my life as an adoptee. Can you help me ask me some questions? And it'll come up. I can pretty much guarantee you'll come up with because I've played around with it quite a lot and continue to do
Yeah.
so. It'll do it, right? You
Yeah.
know, you can.
Yeah.
It's not going to be as good clearly as a human, but in terms of
For sure. Yeah.
instant stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so how do beliefs and distortion fit together? Because I'm getting an inkling that they might, right?
Yeah, I think they absolutely can. I actually just finished a really great book that was about how widespread we our cognitive distortions are and how just the ramifications of that. And so, I mean, I think beliefs certainly can be distorted as well. And the thing about beliefs as opposed to just a thought, beliefs carry a lot of weight and they really do build that framework. And so if they're built on a distortion or if they're distorted themselves, you can see like potentially a lot of ramifications that could be negative for us.
Yeah. One of my favorite nuggets that I've been playing around with and asking people about over the last 4 months or so is based on something I saw from Gabor Mate, and he said he did a he did a course called The Gift of Trauma,
Oh,
which is a very interesting positioning,
yeah,
right? The gift of
yeah,
trauma. Okay.
right,
Um, rather than the curse of trauma.
right, right.
Uh, have you heard this phrase, psychological flexibility?
I don't know if I've heard that exact phrase, but talking about flexibility in our thought processes and definitely talk about that
Yeah.
frequently. Yeah.
I was the description that I heard or the definition I was heard was our thinking about our thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, this metacognition piece.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, you know, how are we seeing trauma? Are we seeing trauma as a curse? Are we seeing trauma as a gift? Right. Um, interesting
Yeah.
one. Like
Yeah.
gift as in a lever towards
Growth.
growth and
Yeah.
post-traumatic growth, because all we hear is PTSD. We hear virtually nothing on PTG, post-traumatic growth, right? So if
Right.
if trauma if trauma was a curse, then there's no growth from it. But if trauma was a gift, then it's growth
Yeah.
from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a tricky one because, that you really have to be, it's not that we ever want to invalidate somebody's trauma and or minimize because there is trauma that like real and true trauma that, many people experience and in adoption there is trauma.
Yeah.
But I think too with some flexibility there is opportunity there as well. And I, recently was in a placement where we were just working with a family and an expectant mom that was making an adoption plan and supporting the parties in walking through like some of the really hard stuff and the dialectics involved, like the anticipation and the excitement and the grief and the loss and like all the mixture and part of what we were working on is just knowing like, hey, this is a space. Yes, this is a hard space to be in, just navigating all these different things for everybody. But if we don't really faithfully and intentionally walk through this space, then we are going to miss out on the opportunities for the growth and the good things that lie on the other side of it. If we just gloss through this and don't do the hard work in that space, we don't get to, the good opportunities and the potential on the other
Yeah.
side of that. And I think it's related, that growth piece of trauma. It does require a lot of work and a lot of intention and time too.
Yeah. I always think of I always think of the difference between well, you used the word self-reflection, right? So it's the kind of internal spontaneous reflection, internal spontaneous gratitude, internal spontaneous post-traumatic growth, always from looking at it from our own perspective rather
Yeah.
than trying to, get somebody else excited about it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
the whole thing, when we ever get near any anywhere near gratitude in the adoption space, you hear so many adoptees have been told that they should be grateful, they don't feel grateful, and then they feel invalidated by that, and it all kicks off, right? So
Right. Right.
it's the self stuff. I guess I'm really talking about, and so off the back of this Gabor Mate quote on the back of this, or at the front of this course on the gift of trauma, it was feeling not good enough is isn't a feeling, it's actually a belief.
Relief.
It's the
Mm.
belief that we're not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that seems to me really significant. Does it seem significant to you?
Yeah. I mean, um, kind of the foundation of like cognitive behavioral therapy is this triangle that's, our thoughts or beliefs and our feelings and then our actions and how those interplay together. And really, thoughts and beliefs are the drivers of that. And so they oftentimes create these feelings, and we're more aware of the feeling, but we have more leverage for change at the belief or at the thought that is driving that. And so, yeah, absolutely, I can see that.
Yeah. I came to the same conclusion without the elegancy and the triangles behind you as well, right? On your
No, yeah,
whiteboard.
I just leave that up there on my board because that's talk about that with everybody every week.
Um, so in my more so I'm from well yeah I'm from Yorkshire. I've spent bar the first 5 weeks of my life. I've lived in Yorkshire apart from college and trips and stuff. Um, in Yorkshire, people are known as for being quite blunt.
Mm.
Um, so rather than refined like Southern people. Um, for me, the reason that it's really important and significant is changing a feeling is when we're in the minute, in the middle of that feeling, especially, is nigh on impossible.
Right.
But changing a belief that
Yeah.
it's more hopeful. I see more hope
Yes.
in
Yes.
changing a belief than there is in changing a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just have a lot more power there. You can't tell yourself to stop feeling hurt or to stop feeling alone or to stop feeling not good enough. But if you look at that belief, there are very real things you can do to challenge it, to really assess like, is this true or untrue? Is this helpful or unhelpful? Is this really serving me, or is there something that might serve me better
Yeah,
um, to navigate this? And the ripple effect of that, like then in our feelings, is pretty immediate.
yeah. Have you come across Byron Katie in the work? Have you come across that?
Yes, actually, I love Byron Katie. Yeah, and I have a really good friend that she really devours everything from Byron Katie, and so she passes a lot on to me.
Yeah. So it's the program's called The Work,
Hmm.
and if you put thework.com or thework.org, I think whatever it is on the internet, um, she's got a four-step process which is about the beliefs. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so she take people like processes and systems to bust them. So maybe that's another way of looking at it. You know, I talked about chat GPT. Some people might be like, that's too technological and don't like that, da da da. And also you might think, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to tell chat GPT how I really feel because what's it going to do with that information, right? But
Yeah.
Byron Katie's The Work is a process that you can go through and
Yeah.
you can watch videos online of people going through particular processes and particular work she takes them through.
Yeah.
She uses this
Yes.
process and it's a self process too. Yeah,
Right. And really great resources. Yeah.
really great processes. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, the the other the other thing that really leapt out at me when in your initial description of thriving was this selling ourselves short.
Hmm.
Um, so what what where do you see adoptive parents selling themselves short? Where do you see human beings selling themselves short? Where do you see adoptees selling themselves short? And we can't. We've got to give ourselves grace for the our mis-selling ourselves, haven't we? Right?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
We're not
Right.
blaming ourselves for the mistakes that we've made or selling
Right.
ourselves short sounds like it's intentional, sounds like we're doing it on purpose. Why don't we just stop doing it? And you
Right.
get into all that, yeah.
Yeah, the last thing we need is one more thing to beat ourselves up about, right? But yeah, I think a lot of times in adoption, particularly, and it varies for different types of adoptions, right? Because some families are built through adoption and it's not outwardly, obvious to other people. And some families are built through adoption where immediately know, like, their family was likely built through adoption, just because of the way their family is made up and the way they look potentially. And so, it differs, but I think a lot in adoption, we define ourselves and families and adoptees often define themselves as other, and that there's some element, and I see this too in women who've placed for adoption, that like really those limiting beliefs of like that is the failure in their life, or that is that that event is going to define them for evermore. And it certainly is an aspect. It's not something that ever goes away, but it also is, how the framework again, like around it, is this a failure? Is this otherness? Is it limiting, or is it beautiful? Is it how do we choose to look at, our individual pathway to being a family, and to the things that we're doing in a way that allows us to move forward with our potential instead of like, well, limiting that way. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but
I think that these crisis moments can turn us significantly. The crisis moments, the way that the way that our actions are frowned upon by society, the cultural
yeah,
norms, um, stuff that we might have getting from unconscious. What do they call it? Um, Cultural biases, and
sure.
this can all snowball
Yeah.
into a really bad shame thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even just like something as simple as like the language we use around adoption is often so shame laden. And like if you're bombarded with that all the time, it can be hard to not absorb that as like fairly limiting. Um, most of the time, I don't think it's intentionally harmful, but it's naive and unaware. And so, but those can be limiting to some families and to some adoptees, and then, how do we let go of that? How do we not let that absorb in and know that, like, we can, we're not going to let that be the definition of
Yeah.
us. And
Yeah. It seems to me that if we've got these beliefs, we can they go maybe two ways. We see them as untrue, or they get replaced by something else. They get replaced by a different belief.
yeah,
How do you see that?
yeah, I personally think that it takes a lot of intention to replace them. Um, Sometimes I teach the raspberry pie principle, where this pie my family used to always make, and you'd take your scoop out of it, and but like the space where you took your scoop, it just fills in with the filling, because I don't think we were very good at making pies. And so, like, if we want to be intentional about what we replace it with, like, it's got to be an effort. Like, otherwise it'll just fill back in with the same kind of stuff. If we're saying, I want to shed this belief because it's limiting and it's not true and it's not helpful, if we just leave a gap, then likely it'll fill in with more limiting, unhelpful, and true. But I think if we're intentional about, no, like, this is more true, more helpful, and this is what I want to hold on to, we really do have to put some effort into it and make it an intentional process. And I think that's definitely true in adoption. Definitely true, for any of us working on growth, which hopefully we all are. But um, yeah, I think it takes some work and some intention to do that.
And aren't we culturally, both, this is, the Western world, UK, especially UK and US, I guess Canada as well. Aren't we, isn't the whole kind of trauma focus, obsession, fixation, kind of selling, isn't, aren't we, aren't we selling ourselves short? Are we selling ourselves short with this? Like, when I was on holiday in Greece last year, I was chatting to, we go away with some friends that we met in Turkey, me and my wife, and uh, the guide that we go with, Steve, he said pendulums swing too far, right? So
Yeah,
we've gone we've gone from, let's say, before the primal wound. It was only published in 1993. So in 1992, as far as 1992, there's no real awareness of relinquishment trauma. And
right.
and then Nancy Verrier comes along with this theory and with this book, and then that captures the the public's imagination, and all these other great people, Gabor Mate, come along, and Bessel van der Kolk, and it just seems to be trauma all the way, right? So we've gone from rainbow and unicorns
Yeah,
straight to trauma. The pendulum has swung too far, and we are now obsessed with trauma. Everything's trauma. Um, Social media's trauma. Everything. We've developed a trauma fixation, and it's not
yeah,
the adoption world that's trauma obsessed. It's society at large. Everything's triggering. Everything's traumatizing. But
yeah.
aren't we selling ourselves short? Aren't we selling adoptees short with this fixation?
Yeah,
Have we gone too far?
yeah, I use the pendulum, visualization all the time, kind of, and it's the natural way of things. But I also, at this conference I was just at, there was in one of the meetings where it was kind of intended for like some of the agency directors that were there representing different adoption agencies and some discussion about current things happening and challenges and successes and things like that. And the meeting got a little spicy. There were some opinions shared that other people jumped on that didn't like, and I just on the way out was just talking with somebody about kind of the some of the things that were brought up, and they just said, nothing that was said was like totally wrong or totally right, and it's like there's actually, if people would stop and like really hear each other on these issues, there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of there's elements of truth in all of it. And I think that that's like our best practice, is yeah, if we're going to ride the pendulum like all the way to this side and all the way to this side, then we're going to, I think we are going to miss some of that important overlap that says, like there is some middle area or some balanced areas that we can practice where we can acknowledge there is trauma, there is hard things happening, there are hard aspects and parts of adoption for all parties, and there's also beauty and potential for beauty and thriving and in this as well. And can we find the balance between those things instead of just, like being pulled whatever direction society is? And I do think it's not just in the adoption world. I do think it is culturally, that's kind of where the pendulum is right now, to over identify with triggers and trauma and miss potentially a little bit of our strength that can help us navigate that, and the gift that some of those challenges are, like you said earlier.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I think again, it's like, how do we take these things that we're learning and implement them in a way that is it's not reactive, but it's balanced, It's like this is good information to have now. How do we integrate that with other good information that we have and best practices, and so that we can support all these parts and all these parties in adoption to thrive?
yeah. One of the things I heard reading the Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey book or listening to it was this word neuroplasticity, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the way it sounds, it sounds complex, right? Isn't isn't like an insight or a shift in our beliefs? Isn't that what neuroplasticity is?
Yeah. Yeah, I think on a level that is true. Yeah, like it's just this, I love the like the knowledge we have around neuroplasticity is so hopeful. It's so optimistic. Like we can actually create changes in the structure of our brains, and that can benefit us. At really almost any point in our life, there's periods where it's more malleable, but there's opportunity for growth. And as we shed some of the things that are, not helpful or not serving us, yeah, that can open up this whole new area of growth. And we can actually change the physiology of our brain structure in that process, which I just think is amazing.
Yeah. And so what that actually means, has meant for me in the past, uh, my my wife used to be my line manager. Do you use that term in
Uh-huh.
the States? Line manager, kind of like a immediate supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my wife was mine before
Yeah.
she was going out with somebody else, right? And anyway, they decided that we needed to do. There was a couple of others that worked in this team, and Lynn decided, and the other line manager decided that they needed to do some appraisals. And the reason that they needed to do some appraisals was because I was not being a particularly helpful member of the team, right?
Okay.
So. they dressed this up in an appraisal. They created the appraisal to uh, see the error of my ways, right? So that's what neuroplasticity is to me. It's seeing the error of
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that can come from a constructive appraisal from your boss, or it can come from, I remember, doing one of those inventories. You mentioned those inventories, one of those, it wasn't an emotional intelligence one, it was something else, but it's kind of by the by. But, I did this inventory and I just thought, oh, am I doing that? Oh, you know, and you have an insight, you have a
Right.
realization, and you
Yeah.
realize that you kind of
But
need to change
that, I
it.
mean, yeah, that goes back to that concept of emotional intelligence too, though, because that requires a willingness to look at that stuff, And I've had people, do inventories and they just will not, their perspective on it is, well, this is wrong because this is saying this about me, and I that's not true about me, and it's like it's just such a funny response to me because there has to be that willingness for the self-reflection. You can have all the information before you, but from a supervisor at work or from like from a self inventory, if you're not willing to accept that, like, oh, there are things I'm doing that I could improve, could do better, could change, and that doesn't have to be a threatening idea to me. Um, that's that takes, that's a
Yeah,
high degree of emotional intelligence that's able to do that, or that takes some emotional intelligence to do that, I guess I should say.
I'm trying to I'm trying to remember an occasion when didn't want to take it, take a constructive criticism, because I'm sure there have been plenty of those. I don't want to
Yeah,
be like, I'm not doing this to sing my own praises. I'm literally only saying it because I believe that this neuroplasticity word that's bandied around sounds like it sounds like you need a shrink to explain it to you, and it's just an insight, right?
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
an insight. It's a shift in your belief.
right.
It's a change that you see, and so I don't know, like you hear something about skin cancer and you start using factor 50 rather than lying out in the sun for 4 hours with no, like it's just a realization. And
Right.
wouldn't it be better if they actually just explained it like that? Because
Yeah.
that book, that Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey book, it sounds it's just like a promotional piece for their work. It's
Yeah, maybe so. I really like the work of Dan Siegel as well, because I think he does a really good job of explaining things in a way that's very digestible, to whether you're in the field or you're a parent or a teacher or anybody working with youth. But I really like the work of Dan Siegel for that reason too. And he does have some higher level stuff that's more technical, but a lot of his stuff is just really, and I think he does a lot. He collaborates a lot with Bruce Perry, and
yeah,
they have some overlap as well.
cool. So, Megan, we're coming up on time. Is there anything that you want to share that I've not asked you about?
I don't think so. This has been a really great discussion. It's helped me, kind of think through some things as well. I appreciate that, just the opportunity to talk through. I think, just this idea that in adoption, like if we're working on this framework of like, how do we help people thrive? And that's a pretty good framework to come from, and really considering all the complicated pieces in adoption and how we really can support thriving um in that sphere. I think that's really that's meaningful to me, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
What one of just as you're saying now, the thing that came to my mind is I know that there's there's a lot that's wrong about our systems, right? Our welfare
Yeah.
systems, whether that's the welfare system in the US or welfare system here in the UK and globally, right? There's lots of
Yeah.
I and I see a lot of people advocating, trying to challenge that change in the system, and that is necessary. And clearly, the world has got to get better. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I I think it shifts everything externally. And what we've been talking about here is internal growth.
Yeah.
And I think if the more internal growth we have, the more able we are to create change on the outside. But I
Yes.
truly believe that a lot of people are not you listeners, that because you're listening to this podcast, right? You're going you're putting yourself in the space for insights.
Yeah.
I do that quite a lot when I'm doing a training. I'd say, like, well, creating the space for insights or visiting spaces where we're going to have insights. So you go to the conference, right? You're
Yeah.
putting yourself in the path of insights. You can't make them happen, but you're going to a place where it 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 will happen. People listen to the podcast for insights. We're already doing it. But let's focus on let's focus on us.
Yeah.
Let's focus on us. And there's that, what do they call it? The circle of influence and the circle of, yeah.
Yeah.
What's it? Do you remember that one
Yeah.
I'm talking about?
Yeah, I
So
think that my poster for that's over on that side outside
okay,
of the
right.
camera. But yeah, yeah, that for sure is like a concept I lean on a lot, like where do I have my influence? Can I exercise control, for lack of a better word, or influence, I guess is the best word. But and am I putting my energies into things that are actually diminishing the influence I have over these things? Like if I'm putting, even though this is maybe a stressor for me, am I putting it all there and then losing the influence I do have? And I think, like you said, I think as we put our energies into some of the more internal areas of growth, that does situate us better to create the necessary external growth and changes that the systems maybe do need. And but from a much less reactive way and a much more intentional way, because it doesn't serve anybody to just jump on the pendulum and swing
Yeah.
to the extremes. Where we can be intentional, there are changes that need to be made, and things we can always be doing better systemically, and that comes best from a place of, like, where we're in a good place internally and can focus on that growth. I think we have more influence.
Yeah. And you talked a lot about the what maybe a lot. We touched on this. You talked about willingness, like a willingness to change, and this particular person saying, "Well, no, that's not me." For me, it's always been about what I think the first kind of personal development book I read was Seven Habits of
Oh, uh-huh.
Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey, is it?
Yeah.
And Seven Habits, and the first one is begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And that was a revelation to me when I read that. I'd not been the sort of guy that thought, okay, so what am I trying to get? I've been a much more short-term kind of reactive person.
Yeah.
So it was never about being intentional. Like so I was my willingness. Well, I think our willingness goes up the clearer we can see what the end goal is, right?
Yes.
Was it comfortable sitting in front of my wife and this other lady telling me that I was basically crap at my job? She didn't say that. No, just like, but was it comfortable? N-
Right.
no, no, it wasn't. But I kind of like. I could see that I could see the the wrongness in my own
Yeah.
behavior. But the willingness to take on, but I think I've said it already, right? That it's to do with what is it that we're trying to achieve.
Right.
Well, I'm gonna if I want the result to change, I'm gonna have to change. It
Yeah.
doesn't unless I change. There's no change, and we're
Yeah.
snookered to put it in a nice uh, a nice way. I could put a lot of rude words, right? It's family show,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I like that. It boils down to like this was forever ago that probably when I was first starting in adoption work and went to a training. And what I remember is that they said like if you boil down all emotions into two, it's love and fear. And those are kind of like our base emotions. And so like if we're acting from a place of love, like there's good things, and if we're acting from a place of fear, that the outcome of that is very, predictable. And so I think that's where that willingness comes in. Like that comes from a place of love, like self-love, love for others, and unwillingness comes from a place of fear. And, like
yeah,
feeling that we have to armor up and protect. And so I like that. Like it's very simplistic, just like I can see things in those terms for myself that's helpful. Like where am I operating from
yeah.
and where I want to be. So
And there's a lot of people stirring up a lot of fear.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole thing, division is
Yeah.
fear of the other, and yeah, a
Hmm.
lot of politicians doing that.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's another podcast, right? This
Yeah.
is an adoption podcast. Thanks, Megan, and thanks,
Yes, thank you so much.
listeners. It's been great. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks so
listeners.
much.
Take care. Bye.